Hey everyone, welcome to another design diary. In my last one, I was talking about jobs and the mechanic for how those work in the game, and I showed off this early prototype card and some newer designs. And those are for the full-time jobs. What I wanted to talk about today was kind of build on that with adjunct jobs and kind of what I did with those. This is something I'd love some thoughts on because I've gone in a few very different directions and I'm curious what people think. So for those who are not aware, what an adjunct job is it's you're basically hired by the course. So this might be somebody who works full-time doing something else and wants to teach on the side. So we have somebody who works as a professional in the film industry and they enjoy teaching, and once a year they come and teach a class and they're just paid by the class. And so that's called adjuncting. But there are also a lot of people who would love to have full-time jobs in academia and, have not yet been able to get one because, as mentioned in previous diary, the tight job market. And so they might be adjuncting at several different schools in an area, maybe get hired for a couple classes at one, a couple classes for another, a couple classes at a third school, and kind of piece together a salary that way. So this is an important part of the academic job market. It's, unfortunately, in my opinion, a direction that more and more universities are going for cost reasons, is to rely more and more on adjuncts, or what's often called contingent labor, as opposed to full-time or tenure track positions, or even full-time instructors or lecturers that are on multi-year contracts. They really like to be able to hire people just kind of one class at a time. So this is part of the market. It is something a lot of people do. Even if they end up in a full-time job, it might be kind of the first way they get their feet wet teaching or get some experience doing that while they're on the job market looking for a longer term job. So it was something I wanted to model in the game and kind of have as an option if you didn't have a full-time job to get some teaching experience and kind of build up your teaching credentials. So I'm going to show you kind of the initial way I modeled this. And this was with these cards. Apologize for the purple. I'm not a graphic designer. This is a very early prototype card. And basically, if you wanted to adjunct some classes, you could take one of these cards. And as you can see here, you had to roll a dice. And then there was this complicated formula. And this would tell you how many classes you got hired to teach. You could mark that down here and you got paid per class. Then all these other rules. In the very early prototypes where I didn't have a rule book or anything, I was kind of printing all the rules like on the cards and on the game board just so I can keep track of everything as I was figuring out the mechanics, and a lot of that's been simplified now so that they're less cluttered. And anyway, this was how I originally did it because this to some degree reflects reality. Just because you want to teach a class doesn't mean there's a class available for you to teach, or certainly not, as many classes as you might like to teach. If you're only getting paid a certain amount for each one, you're like, man, I really need to be teaching 6 classes, and you can't find 6 classes in your area that are hiring in your field or that have an opening to hire an adjunct. So this kind of reflected the reality to me a little better, that there is some unpredictability to this. However, it was a huge complication to have this sort of formula, and then you're keeping track of the classes and such for something that's a relatively minor part of the game. Within the game, people are not trying to kind of stay adjuncting. They're trying to get full-time jobs and move forward that way. So I did think at one point about just getting rid of the adjunct line entirely, and you're either in a full-time job or you're not. Or I guess technically you're in a full-time non-academic job is another option you have in the game where you can earn a salary, but it doesn't give you professional achievements moving towards academic success, which is of course the goal of the game. But again, I think this is an important part of the job market, important thing for people to understand. And from a game standpoint, if you were trying to get hired at jobs and weren't getting hired because you didn't have a good teaching score, this was a way to get some practice teaching and raise that attribute for your character so that you hopefully could then get a full-time job. So what I've done now is given you, if you want to teach a class, we just assume in this world of the game there's some classes available and people hiring for adjuncts, but there's a limit as to how many classes you can get hired for. So here is a prior iteration of one of the boards for the game. And you can see this is still at the stage where kind of everything is printed on the board and I was trying to figure things out. But if I kind of zoom in on here, You can see this over here is kind of a job tracker, so you put your token kind of where you were at the time. And there's an option here now for adjunct teaching. It does require a graduate degree, which most of the time is the case. Sometimes you might be able to get hired with a bachelor's if you have experience in the field professionally. But for purposes of the game, I decided that I wanted people to have the graduate degree, so it wasn't just turn one, you're like, well, let me just start teaching some classes and bumping up that, because that's not going to progress you in the way you need to go to succeed in the game. So this is the option now. If you want to teach courses, you can. Here's your pay. You can teach a max of 4 courses per year. And you also could be in a part-time job and also doing some adjuncting at the same time. So that's where I'm at right now. I definitely think this works better than the prior version, where it was just way too complicated even to figure out how many classes you were allowed to teach and involve calculations and such. And also doesn't overcomplicate what's a relatively minor part of the game, but still leaves the idea of adjuncting in there, which I think is an important thing for a game about the academic world. Something about me still wants the idea somehow modeled in here of that you can't always just teach as many adjunct classes as you would like, that there are not always that many available. I don't know. I'm still kind of weighing, is there a way to get that without overcomplicating things compared to the current version where it's very simple, it's straightforward, everyone understands it, but it is just kind of, hey, I want to teach 4 classes. Great, here you go, here's 4 classes. So end result is, like many aspects of the game right now and a lot of things you're hearing about in these design diaries, I think it's generally working pretty well. I'm not 100% sold on it and still trying to figure out if there's some way I can tweak things a little bit to keep the functional game mechanic of it, but make it a little closer to reality where there's not as many adjunct positions anytime you want them immediately available. But we'll see kind of where that goes. Would love others' feedback and thoughts on that. And that'll wrap it up for this one. I will see you next time.